World War III breaks out and a nuclear nightmare becomes reality as thousands of hydrogen bombs destroy the world's greatest cities. A deadly fallout of ash and debris creates a nuclear winter. With the latest rhetoric from President Biden giving a warning of nuclear Armageddon, and President Putin saying that they'll use all means necessary to defend Russia, and then President Zelensky um, calling for a preemptive strike. I feel like it's very fitting to go ahead and talk about this, and let's have discussion about it. I want to add that later President Zelensky clarified his statement, meaning that he said, or he meant to say, preemptive sanctions, not a preemptive nuclear strike. And also, let's watch this clip real quick about how President Biden and the White House basically softened his rhetoric. I also want to add that his comments about nuclear Armageddon were at a private dinner. I could not find them. The public was not in that private dinner in New York, so I couldn't find them. But let's go ahead and dive in. Thank you for watching. Give a like and subscribe.
The Biden administration is downplaying remarks by the president in which he said Russian President Vladimir Putin's threats to use tactical nuclear weapons pose the greatest prospect of Armageddon since President Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The State Department is echoing similar remarks by the White House, saying the U.S. has not seen a reason to adjust its nuclear posture or seen any indication Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons in the near future.
What President Biden was speaking to yesterday was how seriously we take these threats and how seriously we take the threats of nuclear weapons.
All this after President Biden spoke at an off-camera fundraiser, saying he knows Putin well, and he's not joking when he talks about potential use of nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons.
We have been quite clear about that when Russian officials have made this threat over the course of this conflict. This kind of irresponsible rhetoric is not something that should be coming from a leader of an armed nuclear state.
It comes as President Biden believes Putin is growing more desperate on the battlefield after a series of Ukrainian military successes in recent weeks. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says he doesn't think Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons yet, but officials there are laying the groundwork with the Russian public, saying this to the BBC.
They begin to prepare their society. That is very dangerous.
Ukraine says 200 square miles of its territory and dozens of settlements have been retaken in the south in the past week, and Ukrainian forces are also advancing in the east. Ty Hernandez, ABC News, New York.
So there are preparations from multiple countries, not just Russia preparing for nuclear attack, but America is also, and they said it was more so on a, normal type of preparation, that this is something that they always do, but the timing of it is interesting.
A major fire this morning with a nuclear threat looming. A major fire on the bridge linking Russia to Crimea. The blaze visible for miles. Reports of a huge explosion at around 6 a.m. local time. Russian authorities saying it was a truck bomb that caused the blast on this key strategic bridge for Russia to ship military supplies to Ukraine.
Huge explosion destroys part of a bridge linking Russia and Crimea, and just more moves.
So basically, this bridge was part of the supply chain and resupplying Russian soldiers in the Ukraine invasion, war, whatever you want to call it.
To what hopefully does not lead to nuclear war. I'll get into all that in this video, and how there's a lot of talk of that going on, and just how often when we see them constantly talking about something in the news, oftentimes it leads to that, hopefully not. And then I'll also mention a verse in the Bible that relates to this and how we are not supposed to worry. But first, the story: huge explosion destroys part of a bridge linking Russia and Crimea. A huge explosion rocked a strategically important bridge linking Russia and the Crimean Peninsula early Saturday, bringing down sections of road and causing fuel tanker wagons to catch fire on a train. The Kerch Strait Bridge, which has been a symbol of Putin's illegal...
If you remember, I think it was 2014 or somewhere around there where Russia annexed Crimea.
Legal annexation of Crimea in 2014 was partially destroyed by a blast that was triggered by a truck bomb being blown up. That's at least what they're coming out and saying right now in Russia. Looks like 3 people have been killed, so pray for their families. This just looks to be more of wars and rumors of wars, turmoil in the earth, nation rising against nation, and just the perfect setup for world turmoil for the false man of peace, the Antichrist, to come in and make a false peace and then take over the world. Worth mentioning in this whole situation is the Nord Stream gas pipeline that blew up recently. I'm sure everybody saw about this. Of course, this is getting blamed on Russia, but there was footage of Biden coming out saying that that pipeline will be taken out if Russia doesn't stop fighting in Ukraine.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
So who knows what happened there?
I want to add that was in February of 2022.
Also just more moves and these attacks on just everything that we're seeing with natural resources and a push towards, I don't know, because they're not really trying to do solar or wind. So just completely pricing us out of electricity and gasoline. I don't know what their goal is there, but there's tons of oil on Earth. We should still be drilling. The part that I find a little uncomfortable is this constant talk lately of nuclear war going on between each nation, every nation. We've got Russia talking about it, Ukraine, America, and even Kim Jong-un setting off missiles, flying over Japan, putting the people there on alert. There's a constant talk in the news right now. And here's an article: Biden warns of nuclear Armageddon threat from Putin, and Russian President Vladimir Putin is not joking about his threat to use nuclear weapons and warned of nuclear Armageddon during a New York City fundraiser. That's what I don't like. I don't like when we're constantly hearing all of this stuff in the news about it, because it's very similar to other things, everything that went on with.
Right. And I want to add too that this talk of nuclear threat, it's been going on for a long time, and a long time as recent, I would say within the last year. So they just keep talking about it. And I do think that that's very interesting, because generally speaking, if you keep talking about something, then you're going to do it, or it's just showing that decision is that much closer to being made.
With the 19, as well as everything that has been talked about lately with food shortages. And we're not seeing food shortages totally in the market, but we're seeing, because of food shortages or supply chain shortages, the cost of food has increased a lot in the past few years. So we're seeing the effects of shortages, and it's predicted, Lord willing, it won't get worse, but it's predicted that it'll get worse. And that's when I get worried, when they continually talk about this stuff to the public to get them used to it beforehand. Worth noting on this whole front is that $290 million, the US purchases $290 million of a drug used in radioactive and nuclear emergencies. That's potassium iodine. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea just to have some of that on hand, but it's probably through the roof right now and hard to get, I'd imagine. This article from 4 days ago says Kyiv gives out potassium iodine pills to evacuation centers in preparation for nuclear attack on Ukraine's capital. So Kyiv has been giving out these pills. Russia has been giving them out as well. The US is now getting them. And for some reason, Kim Jong-un's trying to get involved in the whole situation, and he's doing missile flyovers.
While the world watches Ukraine, Kim Jong-un is reminding us all that he's still a major threat too. North Korea launched a powerful ballistic missile over Japan, one that's capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. The missile traveled nearly 3,000 miles before splashing down in the Pacific. That's the longest distance ever for a North Korean weapon, according to Japanese and South Korean officials. It's far enough to strike the U.S. territory of Guam, where the U.S. military has 2 bases.
So truly, again, what it just points back to, like I mentioned, is in Matthew 24, talking about the signs of the times and the end of the age leading up until the Great Tribulation. And Jesus' disciples on the Mount of Olives ask him, what will be the sign of your coming back to us? And
over the past 6 months, we have been investigating as well as exposing
the scripture warns us over and over what's going to happen. And the Most High tells us to not be afraid of what's going to come, but to be prepared spiritually, more so than anything.
When people eat food made out of bugs.
And the end of the age. And Jesus answered them and said, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. That's what I believe the timeline that we're living in right now. The beginning of sorrows, these things that Jesus mentioned that will be before the tribulation, which comes later, but not long after that. But a key verse to realize within that message is what Jesus says in verse 6, see that you are not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So here's Jesus telling us all these things will be going on around us. They aren't good things, but you are not supposed to be troubled. We have a great hope to look for.
And that's why I wanted to do this video as well, to remind people that no matter what's going on in the world, the Most High is still on the throne, And in the words of one of a prominent rapper who engaged in blasphemy, he said, "We're going to be all right." And I do believe we will be all right. The Most High has always taken care of his people, and he's never allowed them to be totally wiped from the face of the earth. So I don't think that we have anything to worry about. And if we know that that this life we're just passing through, you know what I mean? This is not our eternal destination. Then what, you know, what do we truly have to worry about?
Forward to as believers. So the most important thing we can do is share the truth about Jesus Christ to get other people to be saved when these times happen and these times get worse. That way they can also share in the great hope of seeing that they are not troubled. Because what's really good about the situation is that Jesus Christ will be coming back to make everything right. And that's exactly what the world needs right now. So see that you are not troubled. Seek the Lord Jesus Christ. Be fervent in prayer and relationship with Jesus. And don't worry, we are not called to worry. God has a plan and he knows exactly what he's doing. Let's not forget that he sets up world leaders. The Bible says that he puts leaders in place, and even through the wicked ones, such as Nebuchadnezzar, he works his plans out. A few good verses that point to this would be Daniel 2:21 and 22, which is Daniel talking to Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, he, referring to God, changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and dispossesses them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. Another good scripture on this is Psalm chapter 2. I'll read verses 1 through 4. It says, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision." So these kings of the earth and the people of the earth with all the power and the wealth, they think they have all the answers and they think that they can come against God and his anointed, but God sits in heaven and laughs at their plans because it'd be like an ant trying to take on a human being. And even that isn't a good comparison. One more scripture reference for this. I won't read it. You can go read it yourself if you want because it's long, but Job chapter 12, verses 13 through 25. Might as well just read all of Job chapter 12 at that point, but that's another great scripture reference to how God is in control. He leads, he takes down, he lets people rise up, he takes them down, and he works through it all. So we can keep our full trust that God has all things worked out. Thanks for watching, and God bless.
That was a Sling and Stone YouTube channel. He has some great stuff on there.
Did you know that you can make a...
So let me go in and set up the other videos that I was trying to get. And I guess I could let you know what this is. This is a excerpt from, or episode from, the History Channel, and it basically, is like a walkthrough if a nuclear attack happened. The other piece about this nuclear stuff is like, September was I think National Emergency Preparedness Month. I think it was in Denver. They were giving out bug out bags, which really weren't bug out bags, because a bug out bag is usually everything you need. I mean, they had cotton balls and Q-tips and stuff, and like, really, what's that going to do in a situation where you just need to grab a bag and run? What else happened? New York City, if you remember, they had the PSA about nuclear threat and what to do. And what else happened? I think on a few cities in America, they're on buses or just like signs posted around, what to do in case of a nuclear attack. So, those are the other reasons or the things that made me think about doing a show like this. And so the History Channel did this, and some of the comments are hilarious in a way, because somebody's like, the History Channel is brutal, but this is just to give a mental picture of what it would be like. So I think it was a great video. Let's check it out.
As the horrors of war explode on a scale unparalleled in history, the nuclear nightmare that has haunted man for decades has finally come true. It's explosion, chaos, disorder, death, destruction.
It wouldn't be life as we know it.
Western civilization, as we know it now, will be, for all practical purposes, wiped out of map.
A global cataclysm, not of nature, but at the hands of mankind itself.
You ever think about something? Imagine if we used the same amount of resources to preserve life and to make life better for every human compared to the amount of resources that we use to kill and, murder and maim and destroy. The amount of money that goes into, military budgets, and then how much money goes into healthcare, how much money goes into paying people a living wage. Do you ever think about that? It's not sustainable. The current system, the way that the global world order is, it's not sustainable. And even with the creation of AI, it's like, you know, and viruses, we spend more money on bioweapons and viruses and weapons and things used to kill than to uplift and edify. I feel like that's very interesting. And it kind of just shows that, like, I don't know why anybody would want the current system to continue. I'm not saying I'm advocating for destroying everything. Actually not. I'm saying I'm advocating for turning the direction on the system the way that it's been presented. But if you ever heard of Dr. Cornel West, he said he was losing faith in America's ability to reform itself, that the system is losing its capability to reform itself, and that he was losing faith in its ability to reform itself. And I think that's a very great point from Dr. Cornel West.
Will you be ready when doomsday strikes? Can any of us survive? In August 1945, nuclear war became a reality when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities in Japan. 7 decades later, the arsenals of the great...
And you got to know that the weapons that we have now are much more deadly, much stronger. They can pack so much power in a smaller nuclear warhead. They can pack rockets with multiple nuclear warheads. They can reach a lot farther. The ways to launch these said weapons, like they've made a lot of progress, if you want to call it that, in the nuclear realm.
Powers are 140,000 times more powerful. What would happen if a nuclear war broke out today?
You want to hole up somewhere with a lot of supplies, somewhere preferably heavily protected.
We no longer have the shelters. We don't maintain them. We stopped maintaining them decades ago.
This is a long-term, horrible, horrible catastrophe.
It will be the worst thing ever to happen in human history.
It's a typical morning in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Tourists crowd around the world-famous Liberty Bell.
The normal citizen would not have much warning.
Weighing more than 2,000 pounds, the imposing bell seems indestructible, despite its famous crack.
The light is blinding. The bell itself is blistering and boiling, and then everything is gone. The tourist hasn't seen any of this after that initial flash, because the tourist himself is gone.
What they say, like the nuclear weapons today, like 740,000 times more deadly, more powerful than before. Like, that's an astronomical number when you really think about the power of these weapons even back then compared to now.
It's the moment people across the world have feared for more than 70 years. An incident between the United States and Russia has escalated, plunging the world into nuclear war.
Is it me, or does it seem like that the world leaders are following like a playbook? Like all this stuff was already planned out. Because I just find it interesting that, you know, even with this History Channel episode, it's between Russia and the United States that nuclear war breaks out.
The first nuclear explosions of the war aren't aimed at bringing down buildings or killing people. Intercontinental ballistic missiles are launched high into the atmosphere, where they explode 300 miles above the United States, Europe, and Russia. Their purpose is to destroy electronics.
If you set off a nuclear weapon in the upper atmosphere, you can produce an electromagnetic pulse that can disable electronics all around a huge area of the Earth.
I feel like this was in a movie as well with Bruce Willis. It's a Good Day to Die Hard or something like that, where Russia attacked like the power grid and launched launched nuclear weapons. And I think they were EMPs in that movie. I could be wrong, but I think they were EMPs in that movie. Electromagnetic pulse.
It's not easy to tell what kind of effects you'll have because it's such a large area. Some equipment is going to be affected, some of it's going to be affected but not totally destroyed. So it's going to create a very chaotic situation with regards to our very high-tech society.
The electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, shoots massive currents through electronic circuits, creating chaos. All over the southern hemisphere, emails and texts from the north suddenly stop. The interconnected world is beginning to unravel.
It'd be like going back to the Stone Age, like just from not being able to use the internet or your phone. Because you imagine, like, my grandmother, she's 85, and I asked her if like she could ever fathom the fact that people would be walking around with computers in their pockets. You know, like our phones are literal computers. You know, if you have the Samsung phone, then they have the Samsung DeX, and you can use your phone like a computer. You don't really need a computer because your phone can serve as your computer.
In Sydney, Australia, an international banker loses connection with her colleague on Wall Street. In Santiago, Chile, a businessman is cut off from a video conference call.
Are you a low-income American on food stamps or Medicaid? If so, you are now
Based in Moscow. But while there's confusion below the equator, in the northern hemisphere, where the war has begun, there's widespread turmoil. On highways from the United States to Canada, and from Western Europe to Russia, traffic comes to a standstill as many electric circuits in cars are fried. The confusion is compounded because some electronic devices are disabled and some are not.
Some cars just stop. This will create wholesale chaos on a major thoroughfare, and traffic will be snarled for hours, possibly even days.
It seems like some kind of spooky, crazy thing is going on.
But it's not just bedlam on the highways. People everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere are faced with unexpected crises. The pilot of a passenger jet starts his initial descent into Brussels, Belgium. When things suddenly start to go wrong.
It's not going to be immediately obvious to a pilot what has gone on.
Yeah, I could not imagine being in a plane.
Either fail or be disrupted.
And just imagine, like, you know, they probably wouldn't know, and they probably wouldn't tell the crew at the time.
For Russia's EMP disruption. The pilots can't get a signal from flight control. Unable to land, they are running out of fuel and options. While the public at large is in a state of mass confusion, both the American and Russian armies are operating at full speed. Their electronic systems hardened against the electromagnetic effects of the atmospheric nuclear explosions. The major nuclear powers unleash their arsenals. There are about 15,000 nuclear warheads in the world today. 5,000 in storage are due to be dismantled. The rest remain weapons of war.
Out of the 10,000 nuclear weapons that are in the possession of the military, roughly 1,800 are on alert, ready to go on top of ballistic missiles on very short notice. The overwhelming amount of nuclear weapons on alert are US and Russian. Britain and France have a few. Britain has about 40, France has about 50 that are on alert. There are no other nuclear weapon states that have nuclear weapons on alert.
While all of Britain's and France's warheads are on submarines, the US and Russia have missiles both on subs and on land. Land missiles are based deep in the heartland of each country. And while both sides have them in silos, only Russia deploys mobile launchers. These weapons are designed to kill and destroy on an unthinkable level.
If you make the rocket very large, and you can make the nuclear warheads very small, you don't have to limit yourself to just one warhead per missile.
Some missiles have as many as 10 warheads, each one 50 times as powerful as the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima in 1945.
In the first strike, you're going to have something in the order of 600 to 700 ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads from both countries flying against each other.
A nuclear war in the modern age is going to be pretty fast. A lot of it is going to be motivated by the fact that a lot of our weapons are targeting a lot of their weapons and vice versa. So whoever strikes first gets to use their weapon. If you leave the weapon in the silo and they're allowed to hit it, then you've lost it. They call this use it or lose it. The first signs that you're likely to get before any official news are going to be coming from Twitter and Facebook and other internet sites. As people that are in the paths of these missile silos are going to start reporting that there are a lot of rockets taking off nearby.
Planet Earth erupts into nuclear war. For every person, every family, the global conflict becomes intense.
I'm making this quick video because it has been 1 month since joining the Cashflow 101 system. And
Sleep personal. Where will our next meal come from? Will there be water to drink? Will radiation kill me? Can I hide? Will mankind come to its senses and halt this self-destruction? Or is this the beginning
That's a great
of our
question.
final chapter? What would happen if a global nuclear war broke out? Today, would you survive? American and Russian nuclear warheads fill the skies above our planet as the unthinkable has started. World War III. These missiles of mass destruction will take 10 to 30 minutes to reach their targets.
The first cities that would be hit are
10 to
cities
30
that
minutes.
have important military and civilian leadership and command structure in them. Washington, D.C., Moscow. You would have enormously devastating consequences. It's hard to visualize unless you've seen pictures of the destruction that happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the 2 bombs that were dropped over Japan. And those were puny weapons compared to the large yield warheads that are on ballistic missiles.
The nuclear bomb that destroyed Hiroshima in 1945 was only 3% as powerful as each of the warheads heading for Washington, D.C. And today's technology allows for exact marks to be hit.
In Washington, D.C., the most likely targets to be hit very early on, include the White House and the Pentagon.
While nuclear bombs are often exploded in the air, the White House and Pentagon are targeted for ground bursts, detonating on the surface to destroy underground war rooms and executive shelters.
If you want to do the most damage underground, you set off a ground burst. It makes a crater and destroys bunkers.
The Russian missile aimed at the White House is exactly on target.
A 500 kiloton warhead attack on the White House would create a fireball with a diameter of 1 mile.
Inside the fireball, temperatures reach more than 10 million degrees, instantly killing everyone it touches.
It's like the center of the sun. Everything inside the fireball is incinerated. You are vaporized. You are instantly one with the universe.
The blast pressure outside the fireball is almost as deadly.
It throws things into you. It throws you into things. You can have bones break. And it could even rip the skin off your bones.
It's going to be letting out huge amounts of heat energy. Just the heat alone from this is going to be able to give people third-degree burns.
Yeah, and like something that we've never even seen before, not on this scale. I think that's important to note.
Over a diameter of 5.5 miles.
Buildings and structures are not spared either. The Washington Monument, 555 feet tall, crumbles.
The marble and granite blocks of the Washington Monument will break apart under high pressure. They'll pulverize, they'll turn to dust. The crystalline structure of granite, while making it strong under gravity, blows apart under high pressure.
Even a dozen miles beyond the blast and the heat, the light robs eyewitnesses of their sight.
If you're standing far away from a nuclear explosion that you don't get killed instantly, you can still be blinded because the flash of light is extraordinary and it will just put your retinas right out.
The blindness only lasts a few minutes, but these people won't live long enough to get their sight back.
From one ground burst explosion in Washington, D.C., about 300,000 people would be killed. Now imagine more than a dozen of these explosions going off all over the city.
Events are back, you guys. Events are back. They're booking speakers like you. They're paying them $5,000.
At virtually the same time as Russian bombs hit Washington, the US, Britain, and France strike Moscow with 80 warheads. The city becomes a field of flaming wreckage, and 1 million people are dead almost instantly.
It's not just boom, yay, it's boom, 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 cloud, cloud, explosion, chaos, disorder, death, destruction. It's a hellscape.
While the US and Russian capitals are going up in flames, billions of people don't yet know that a nuclear war has started thousands of miles away. In Sydney, Australia, the international banker tries to reach her partners in the US and Europe, but can't establish any form of communication. At the American embassy in Tokyo, agents find that all lines to Washington go down at the same time. Some governments begin to piece the news together from spy and weather satellites. They must either join the fight or do their best to stay out of it. But while some nuclear powers hold their fire, the war between the US and Russia rages on.
After the initial salvo, the second tier of targets will include nuclear weapon storage sites and industries that support the nuclear war.
Among those targets are cities like Philadelphia, where people are still unaware that a war is underway. Here is where the tourists viewing the Liberty Bell become victims of war. The carnage is massive, and this is just the beginning. Across the Atlantic Ocean, warheads now aim at America's allies. In Brussels, NATO headquarters is among the targets hit. Just 3 miles away, the airport is also destroyed, stranding a plane about to land.
A large jetliner needs over a mile of runway to land. If there are no runways, you can't land a Boeing in a field.
You don't carry a lot of extra fuel because it's heavy. So now there's a ticking clock, and you've got to get that plane down, and there's nowhere around.
At any given time, there are about 10,000 aircraft in the air around the world. Thousands, like this one, suddenly have no place to land. And hundreds of miles above, more warheads streak through space. Ordinary people become aware of the terror. They rush to find cover, no one knowing where the bombs will fall next. If they are outside target cities, can they survive? Is any place on the planet really safe? Consider the unthinkable. A nuclear war spreads across the world. Is everyone doomed? Or will some of us survive? Across the US, Russia, and Europe, capitals, major cities, and military bases have already been destroyed. Millions are dead. Word of the war spreads. And outside the initial strike zones, from Siberia to southern Italy, people run to take shelter.
Can you imagine the mayhem and the chaos?
In Kansas,
This is why it's
America's
important to be
heartland,
spiritually prepared more than
the first
anything.
occupants arrive at a unique high-end survival bunker. Lavishly outfitted from the remains of a silo that once housed an Atlas rocket, America's first intercontinental ballistic missile.
There aren't very many fallout shelters anymore. But people have decked out these missile silos into these luxury apartments. They cost more than $1 million.
They have 5 years worth of food. They've got hydroponic growing systems. And apparently 70 people, that's a community, can live for 5 years and wait for the worst to blow over.
It's not impossible to imagine creating a bunker where people could live for 5 years. Will they be happy? I don't know. It depends on the people probably and how nice the bunker is.
But not everyone in America's Midwest has access to underground bunkers. Those without are in peril.
Uh-oh, now the Wi-Fi is tripping. Let's see if we can get this going again.
As
There we
more
go.
than 400 Russian warheads begin detonating in powerful ground bursts to destroy missile silos buried deep under the surface.
Ground bursts are the worst for nuclear fallout because you're exploding something on the ground and you're getting all this radioactive material mixed in with the dirt and it gets launched up into the air.
The deadly radioactive clouds began drifting toward population centers. At Whiteman Air Force Base, an hour outside of Kansas City, Missouri, the crews manning 18 B-2 stealth bombers are rushing to take off. Along with B-52s, they are the only bomber designated to drop nuclear bombs. This makes them prime targets, leaving American commanders only one option.
Scatter the planes, disperse them to other airports around the country that are out of reach or haven't been destroyed yet.
The planes are scrambling. Just as the Russian warhead hits, it's too late. Meanwhile, in Europe, another NATO capital comes under fire as an 800-kiloton bomb reaches the city of Rome. With 50 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb, it explodes in an air burst. A blast set to detonate before the warhead hits the ground.
If you want the maximum destruction, you have an airburst. You detonate the nuclear weapon above a city, and then it creates this massive shockwave that destroys everything underneath it.
Inside the 3-mile-wide blast zone stands the 2,000-year-old Colosseum.
It's built of unreinforced concrete. It's just going to get blown to dust. It will be 500-mile-an-hour winds that will then just scatter this dust everywhere.
Less than 1 hour into nuclear war, it's already the deadliest day in human history. 1,000 warheads have taken 25 million lives. And worse is yet to come. The missiles now take aim at major population centers, where the only goal is to kill. In 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs in Japan, an indelible sign of what is possible. What if nuclear war broke out today? Could we survive?
If it's the will of the Most High, yes, you will survive.
A fiery hell is crossing the face of the earth, as almost 2,000 ominous nuclear mushrooms scar the landscapes of the US, Europe, and Russia. Tens of millions are dead in a lethal tide that stuns most survivors into a blinding fear. World War III has suddenly turned the great powers into wounded giants, populated by desperate refugees with no place to go. In the flaming ruins of Moscow, the radioactive landscape suddenly trembles as a low rolling thunder vibrates through the air. It's the sound of the bombing of London, more than 900 miles to the west. The city was destroyed over an hour ago. The sound waves
I would say
moving
they
at
did a great job
This
in
is the Pete
including
Tong
the
DJ Academy.
particular
Welcome to the Pete Tong
places that, you know, would be affected.
At 770 miles per hour are reverberating across Europe. Over the next few hours, people all over the world, in cities that haven't yet been hit, are shaken by the sound of distant nuclear strikes from hours ago. Ghosts of a war that is not yet over. For those not instantly killed in the initial assaults, survival takes presence of mind. Put aside the horror. Concentrate. Stockpile food. Stash away as much water as you can. Stay inside. Take care of your own. Underground in Kansas, 70 survivors in a well-provisioned bunker know they are in for the long haul. They are prepared to defend themselves from outsiders. But what if the unexpected happens?
What if one of them has some sort of episode? What if they have a mental breakdown? I would really like to know how far they've thought of all of the different contingencies, because if just one comes up that is unsolvable, you're losing those 70 people.
Meanwhile, there are survivors in the air too.
And for 70 people to exist
As
in the
Brussels
same
burns,
space,
a passenger jet heads north towards Hemmetson, hoping that
considering
this insignificant
humanity
town
at the
will have
moment.
somewhere to land.
The pilot has actually a really, really good option. If you remember the Miracle on the Hudson, large jetliners are actually really good gliders.
The fuel tanks are empty, with no runway in sight. The pilot eases the jet down on the river shelf. For the moment, the passengers and crew are safe. But their struggle for survival in the nuclear ashes is only just beginning. An eerie pause comes over the planet as the horror sinks in. The remaining nuclear weapons, mostly on submarines and mobile launchers, will take at least 2 days to reach their launch positions. And the attacks will be widespread.
Those forces might last for days, they might last for weeks. And theoretically, there's no limit to how long the submarines that are hiding in the oceans can survive.
As the war expands worldwide, a Russian naval commander finds a target of opportunity in the southern Pacific. An American aircraft carrier docked in Australia at Sydney Harbor. The Russian commander launches a nuclear-tipped cruise missile at it to take it out. The carrier and its 6,000 crew members are instantly vaporized. And outside the weapon's half-mile fireball, the iconic opera house becomes collateral damage.
Suddenly it's
The power of these weapons is unfathomable in what they can truly do, and the repercussions of actually using them is also unfathomable. Like, they're giving a sight picture into what it would be like to use it, what would be vaporized and all that stuff. But the after effects, I think, make it that much worse as well.
lit up brightly, more bright than the middle of the day.
The individual plates on the sails will peel off, the superstructure will bend, the building will get blown inward and collapse. This iconic structure will crumble under its own weight into this unfortunate, catastrophic mess.
"6,000 miles away, American nukes strike Beijing as the U.S. suspects Chinese involvement in the Sydney attack. Chinese submarines retaliate with nuclear hits along America's west coast, from Seattle to San Diego.
This game.
No structure standing. There would be rubble everywhere.
The death toll pushes past 100 million, as thousands of square miles are left smoldering where cities and military bases once stood.
Look back at the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you just multiply that by millions, you can imagine the aftermath of a global nuclear exchange.
My grandfather told me about landing in Hiroshima after the bomb. He was on a medical ship. And what really struck him was the smell of char and death and destruction. He said he'd never smelled anything like it. And seeing the destruction, it shook him to his core.
And yet, those who die in the thermonuclear fireballs may be the lucky ones. Any survivors will have to face the terrible aftermath of the widespread destruction. A nuclear winter. What happens to a world after the destruction of a total nuclear war? Can any of us survive? Cities from America to Europe to Asia have been destroyed. In the US and Russia especially, the death toll is enormous.
You would imagine well over 100 million people in each country have been killed. The way nuclear wars might evolve, it is hard to imagine that it would be limited.
And the deadly effects are not confined to cities destroyed by bombs. When Russian warheads struck American missile silos in the northern mountain states, radioactive fallout began taking a massive toll.
Wind patterns would
This is
carry
insane,
it,
isn't
drop
it?
on huge
It's like,
areas of
what
the
would be what's worth
So there
destroying
would essentially be no safe place to go.
the Earth what's worth destroying the Earth?
Duluth, Minnesota, a small city of 86,000, was just one of many places directly in the path of the deadly clouds. And people here began to die from radiation sickness.
Radiation sickness is when your organs and tissues that are necessary to keep you running, your nervous system, your blood, if they absorb enough radiation, they're going to start going offline. Suddenly, all sorts of things start to go wrong. You'll get lots of little blood spots, things that look like burns on the body, vomiting.
It's this sort of poisoning of the body that happens. Your hair falls out, your body just stops functioning, and it's a slow, painful, awful death.
A veil of grief for the loss of friends and family compounds the struggle survivors now face for the basics: food, water, and shelter. And residual radiation will kill for decades.
To have some idea of what's going to happen in the future after these cities are ruined, think of Chernobyl. There were cities nearby that were evacuated. Today, they're really overgrown with vegetation and animals are just roaming freely there. That's what it's going to be across huge swaths of North America, for example.
The world now settles into a deep gloom as the skies go dark. The bombs started massive fires that sent 50 million tons of soot into the air.
What happens is it goes up in the atmosphere and it's quickly spread around the world by the wind. And so the result is almost no sunlight gets to the ground.
The soot from the massive nuclear-fueled fires blocks so much sunlight that it plunges the world into a sudden nuclear winter.
This is an ice age with fallout, with radiation. Everything is going to be damaged in some way or another.
So I say again, like, what's worth
Scientists say
destroying the
a
Earth
nuclear
over?
winter will freeze the Earth
Over
for
Ukraine?
about 2 decades.
The onset of this winter is shocking. This is a long...
In the beginning, after a great
term, horrible, horrible catastrophe that would happen in the case of a global thermonuclear war.
The sudden cold destroys world agriculture. The war has already killed more than 200 million people. And now, far more are doomed.
We're talking billions of people who will die from starvation as a result of this.
In a scenario where we have a nuclear war in the northern hemisphere, the US, Russia, Europe, you're going to get the biggest effects of nuclear winter. The southern hemisphere countries will be less affected.
You can imagine a country like Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, where you would have a greater chance of survival after a nuclear war.
let's say humanity survives. Where do we go from there? Would we be able to keep cultures? Would we be able to keep art? Will we have learned our lesson? These are huge, huge questions that is interesting to think about, but also terrifying.
Will civilization endure through a nuclear winter? Or is mankind condemned to a cold, dark death? What happens if the most powerful nations in the world unleash their nuclear weapons in an all-out war? Would humanity survive? Two decades later, the fiery destruction of nuclear war has left half the planet in ruins. And nearly 90% of the world's population has died off.
Which makes me think
Kansas,
about the book of
the old
Revelations, where it
Atlas
talks
silo that
about a
was
third of the
converted
Earth's
into a luxury
population will be
fallout
wiped
shelter
out.
still stands
And
firm.
then another third, I want to say.
But it's long been abandoned. It was stocked with 5 years' worth of food, and 70 people survived inside. For a time.
Could you make a bunker to ride out a nuclear attack? Sure. Just make the assumption that nobody's going to come help you for a very long time, if ever. Can you do that? Sure. Can you do that for the whole country? No.
Say a handful of people do make it, and they're in one of these shelters, then it's time for them to venture back out onto the surface. They will be entering into a completely unfamiliar terrain. Everything they knew of would be gone.
The Earth eventually begins to thaw from its nuclear winter. The winds break up the global cloud cover, letting sunlight back in, and the planet slowly warms. With the passage of time, the world's decimated population grows, slowly. A century later, the ruins of abandoned cities are overgrown by weeds, as nature eventually reclaims them. There is little rebuilding in the Northern Hemisphere, where the destruction was the greatest.
Now, the real interesting question is what will happen with the rest of the world? Will maybe perhaps Brazil rise to power, or South Africa, or even Australia?
But a rise to power will be a slow process. A city like Rio de Janeiro may not have been physically destroyed, but so many died from starvation that few people remain to pick up where civilization left off. Survivors in the warring countries become refugees, driven to head for warmer climates.
People will migrate. Knowing that perhaps Brazil won't be as affected, a lot of people are going to move from the States, from the barren states to Brazil or maybe Australia.
We already see how refugees operate today. Countries are devastated by war, and people have to leave with nothing but the shirts on their back. So they walk huge distances, or they get on a boat and risk their life trying to cross a sea that is very treacherous. But when you have nothing left to lose, you might as well risk it all.
For 5,000 years, empires rose and fell. Only ruins remain of the Maya, ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. But while these civilizations vanished, mankind did not.
Nobody really knows how many people could survive a nuclear winter. But I'm a little bit of an optimist. I think humans are incredibly crafty, and we've come a long way since our cave-dwelling ancestors. We're really smart. We've got a lot of this knowledge written down. The scientific method allows us to quickly pick up from where we left off. We now know how to make progress much faster. We know how not to fool ourselves.
Will enough people survive? We're guessing that between 1,000 and 10,000 humans would have enough of a variety that we could kickstart the human race again. But if they were able to, hold on and survive, you could have a birth of a new superculture, which would be really cool.
Would it though? I guess at the expense of, everything being destroyed. Yeah, so I think that was like History Channel did a good job on that. It's interesting that the places that would be hit, it just feels like it's all planned out to me. And I'm praying that, whoever is in the line of these things, I'm praying that everyone would be understand that the Most High is going to take care of you, and He has plans to prosper you and give you an expected end, and that you'll be all right no matter what happens in the world. At the same time, we can be knowledgeable and prepared and understand that, the magnitude of these weapons is a lot greater than they used to be. At the same time, we can understand the Most High that we served is greater than anything that's in this world. So ultimately, we have nothing to worry about, is what I'm saying. And if you enjoyed this, go on and give a like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.